competition is so healthy. When you have a powerful competitor, it avoids these internal battles. It doesn't give you the time. It's Darwinian. If you spend too much time with that, you die. It's as simple as that.
Goddamn, I'm old. I can't believe I'm saying this, but strategy has changed dramatically in the 38 years since I've been at Bain. When I started, the name of the game was anticipation. If you could predict the future better than your competitors, you'd win. It was kind of simple. And we would build models, low case, high case, and that just right Goldilocks base case. And if reality didn't match the base case, well, people lost their job. It was all about perfect anticipation. If you could predict the future better than your competitors, you win. But today, the game and strategy is very different. It's not just about predicting the future. It's about how fast you adapt to changes in the future. Sure, we think deeply about what's ahead. Of course, we try to predict. But we know uncertainty isn't some freak event. It's the norm. And that's why in this podcast series, we keep hammering on about this idea of deliver and develop. You've got to anticipate what you've got, but you then also have to evolve fast enough to stay relevant in a changing world. The winners zig when markets zag, and they're going to zag when those markets zig. But how do you create an adaptable strategy and organization? How do you build a culture that thrives in uncertainty? Well, now we're at the final episode of the season, and we're going to explore that question with someone who's lived it. This is a founder who's navigated chaos and competition at the very highest level, and he's lived to tell the tale. I'm Jimmy Allen, and this is Founders Mentality, the CEO Sessions. And my guest is Marcos Galperin, founder, former CEO for almost 3 decades, and now executive chairman of Mercado Libre, also known as Meli. What started as a garage project in Buenos Aires is now Latin America's e-commerce giant. This is a $100 billion ecosystem spanning across 18 countries. And Marcos has played against the absolute best, and he's won. So what I wanted to know was this: what's the one thing that led to Mercado Libre's continued success?
It's hard for me to pinpoint perhaps specific things. I think it's more culture. It's a cultural thing. It's something that you can lose. I see the things that are happening in Europe. Culture can change. You have to enjoy the path, and it's a marathon that doesn't have a finish line. The minute that you think you finished, it's the end. If you look at the brands that have existed for 150 years, I don't think they've beaten a competitor like the one we've beaten in Latin America for the last 10 years. They've made it. They feel like they've made it, and things don't change that much for them. In our industry, on the one hand, it's amazing because in other industries, you cannot create the most valuable company in Latin America out of nothing in 26 years. So this change and this continuous disruption is what creates these possibilities. On the other hand, you can never feel, okay, we've made it. Now we can enjoy for a while. But that is also helpful because I think it's a Darwinian process. If we wouldn't be the way we are, we wouldn't be who we are or what we are, and probably we wouldn't even exist.
But a lot of what founders often talk about with their frustration is, you started with the pioneering team. By definition, we're not talking about the ones that didn't make it. There was a group that made it with you for 2 decades. They recruited managers who saw you working, saw them working. But there are also 10,000 people that have probably never been in a pit with you working on something. You've probably given a town hall 10 times, but they have a manager from another company talk to them 1,000 times. And founders often say the frustration is, my core team gets it, but when I look at the edges of the business, I start to see those toxic people entering. I start to see the bureaucrats coming. So how do you make sure that's not happening?
It's many, many, many things. This culture of trying to act like an elite sports team is key in the sense that oftentimes you keep some people because they have the culture, but maybe they are not performing. You know what? Sorry. Performance has to be there. Maybe if you have the culture, we'll find you a different position. Maybe, you're no longer number 9. You won't score anymore. But you know what? You will be the assistant to the coach, or you will be in the manager's office, or you will be helping us sell more tickets, or you will be helping us, making sure that the stadium is in good shape. But we need in the field the people who are performing. Now, maybe you have in the field someone that is a great performer, but he's a pain in the ass and it's toxic, and he's making great scores, and we're winning many games, but we're not going to win the championship with this guy because he's toxic or she's toxic. And sometimes you need to take some decisions that are tough because, this guy is really good and he's scoring, but we won the game, which was a great game, but we lost the championship because then we lost against a team that was inferior to us. But this guy wasn't motivated because, it wasn't an important game. And you know what? The unimportant games, the points of those unimportant games are as valuable as the point of the classic, So you need someone who performs when they have the spotlight, but they also have to perform when they don't have the spotlight. So all these things, in these 26 years, there's been moments of quiet enjoyment. Since we IPO'd in 2007, all the way to the moment when Amazon launched in Latin America, those were 6 years of continuous growth and scaling, and we had no competition. But then you have to know that this is a calm before the storm, because the storm always is going to come.
God, I love this. The storm is always going to come. Marcos's genius? He built an all-weather company. Of course, Meli's growth story is an exception, not the rule. They thrived in the calm and they thrived in the storm. For the rest of us mere mortals, growth is bloody hard. Think about it. It means every customer from last year comes back, buying a little more and bringing a few friends. We've got to win millions and millions of times. So what is it that lets some companies grow year after year while others stumble? To find out, we turn to someone who spent his whole career chasing that single answer, Chris Zook. And I've spent my whole career being his mentee, his bag carrier, his lackey, his fanboy. I'm proud of every title you give me as long as Chris Zook's name's up front. He actually saved me from being fired in 1988 when I was a useless summer associate at Bain. More than once since then, he's reached across the Atlantic to pick me up and set me straight. I'll tell you, everyone needs a Chris Zook in their life. Luckily, I've had mine for 4 decades. So who is Chris Zook? Chris is an advisory partner at Bain Company and one of the world's leading strategy thinkers, and my co-author. Look, I'm shamelessly claiming that co-author title, but the truth is Chris has written 5 books on strategy, and I've been a big idea contributor. The books are his. He gave me a whiff on Profit from the Core and 2 co-author credits on repeatability and the founder's mentality. That's a generous mentor. His body of work, which is 5 books and dozens of articles, is a master study into the patterns of growth, what drives it, what kills it, and why ultimately the founder's mentality matters so much. And since I've known him, Chris has been obsessed with a single question. What are the secrets to sustainable, profitable growth? So first, he takes us back to how that journey began.
Chris, I would love to just hear you start with your own journey on strategy. For me, it kind of, I think probably the first phase ends with Profit from the Core, but you probably have a journey that started long before writing that. But just tell me how you thought about strategy at the time you wrote Profit from the Core.
Well, I was lucky to join Bain Company when it had 70 people. And it was part of the leadership team that, in a great growth story of its own, grew it now to something like 18,000 with only really one bump in the road when the founders had a messy transition to the next generation. And so, in a way, as an older guy looking back on my life, I realized if there is one continuous theme, it is about the topic of how to grow a business. And we were very lucky to have a focus on what really are the lessons learned and the laws of gravity and the microeconomics of trying to find your next wave of profitable growth. And realizing that, that's really what we decided to focus the strategy practice on, focus the building of tools on, ultimately focus a series of 5 books and 30 articles on. And that actually took up the rest of my life.
I think it's a journey of chapters. And just let's talk a bit about the beginning chapter. So when you first said, asked the question of yourself and answered it, what drives sustainable growth. What was the answer?
I think it was a very interesting period of time in the history of business in the world because it was just before the internet bubble. The internet was obviously on the rise. We felt that it was a time when people were using their gut instincts too much and that there were no tools. So we did something that now would seem pedestrian, but at the time was actually quite unique. We created a database of all the partners of all the public companies in the world for 20 years. No one had ever done that with full financials. And we used it as the actuarial tables of business to ask questions such as what % of companies actually do achieve 10 years of profitable growth, earning their cost of capital, outgrowing their industry, and maintaining or growing their margins. And we found that though every company in the world aspired to that, only 1 in 10 actually achieved it. So then we began drilling down further. And we found about 3 more insights in the data that all came together as the sort of epicenter, intellectual epicenter or empirical backbone for what became profit from the core. Number one, more than 80% of the variation in companies' ability to achieve profitable growth was not the choice of the industry they happened to be in. That was the cold truth of hot markets. What we found was that more than 80% of the variation was among competitors in the same industry. Number 2, there were no bad industries. You could make a lot of money in airlines, which Southwest was doing, or in package delivery, which UPS was beginning to do, or in rental cars, which Enterprise was doing, as you could if you were in a growth market. The key was becoming the best and achieving leadership economics. And then we looked at the profile of those companies that did achieve 10 or 15 years. And we found that about 85 to 90% of the value growth in all of those companies that did achieve was a function of 1 or 2 very strong, dominant, or leading core businesses. And it was less a function of diversification. In fact, we found that 2/3 of the main strategy studies we did, costing $1 million at the time or more, had one common type of insight, which was amazing because you could have said, well, you're going to discover new hot markets. You're going to find acquisitions to double your industry. You're going to use it for international. No. What we found was that nearly 70% of the main insights from these huge studies of strategy was that more potential existed in the core of the core, that the core of the core had been underappreciated.
Let's take ourselves back because context matters. This was the middle of the dot-com boom when almost every CEO was chasing greener digital pastures. And Chris's message was profound. Sustainable growth, he said, demands that you define your core business, drive it to full potential, and from full potential, get leadership economics. And his warning was clear. All your fancy growth strategies, they're distracting you from what you do best, which is the hard execution in the core business. I feel like we're exactly here again with all the discussion about AI, because defining our core in a turbulent market is tough. Market boundaries are shifting. Business definition is evolving. New competitors are emerging, often expanding from their core business into what you thought was your market. So the real question you have to ask yourself in the world of AI is, will today's core still be right for our customers tomorrow? That's Strategy 2025, and that's exactly the challenge that Marcos is facing at Meli. As success in e-commerce grew, he had to ask, do we double down on that core? Or as market definitions are shifting, do we move into financial services? And the question was, where are our customers going? And where must we go to meet their needs? Do we deliver flawless execution of known routines in the core business? Or do we develop, i.e. go after the new businesses that keep us relevant for tomorrow? Well, like other great CEOs, Marcos understood this is a false choice. You've got to do both. Deliver, optimizing, develop, staying relevant. Here's Marcos.
So on one hand, you're trying to run a complex business, which means professionals come in and begin to put in measures and do things in its relentless execution of known routines. And on the other hand, you want to constantly disrupt yourself. And oftentimes, what happens is that running motion, the status quo motion, the keep things static, begins to take over the founder impulse. And you seem to have navigated both of those well. How did you handle those two motions?
What happens many times is you get so focused in optimizing something, but we say we're maximizing the minimum. It's like, yeah, we're optimizing this process, but all this process is irrelevant right now. We're just talking about AI. We have 20,000 developers. This is the first year ever that we won't grow our developers. And it's highly likely that in 5 years, we might have 10,000 developers. Not because we fired them, but we're not hiring anyone. 10 years ago, I would have told anyone, you need to learn how to develop. Today, I say you need to know mathematics. You need to understand like the basics of thinking and numbers, but you don't need to code. On one side, we're optimizing all these things with AI. And on the other thing, we're thinking, maybe all this is going to become irrelevant. We have another group saying, it's going to be an agentic world. And then we have a group in the middle that is going to optimize the experience. And what I was telling them about the agent being your personal banker, I am on one hand, still in my role as co-CEO, thinking, how we go from 20,000 developers, optimize, scaling, increasing our margins, optimizing our minimum all the time. And I'm also thinking it's highly likely that this is going to be relevant. What happens if ChatGPT partners with I don't know what, and all of a sudden our app doesn't show up anymore, and Apple and the iPhone become irrelevant because now it's going to be a new device that OpenAI has partnered with Johnny Ive. They're doing a new thing that you're going to talk to it, and maybe our app is going to become irrelevant. So we're working on all those things.
What happens in organizations that fail is the group that are maximizing the minimum become the defenders of that status quo. Yeah. That they start to say, look, it's got to be this way. And if it's not this way, I quit. And that other team that's trying to change them, they become the enemy. And you've managed somehow to say...
It has to be the same group that does both things. You have to have in the leadership team, they need to understand that you need to optimize the minimum, you need to scale, you need to improve margins. Actually, to use that money to innovate and disrupt yourself.
And you have to have a culture that makes sure that the guys in charge of maximizing the minimum know they're going to still have roles even if that goes away.
Yeah, it's the same guy or the same team that is saying, hey, we need to optimize these things and we need to do all these things. Otherwise, we won't survive. I think that, to be honest, competition is so healthy. When you have a powerful competitor, it avoids these internal battles. It doesn't give you the time for that. It's Darwinian. If you spend too much time with that, you die. It's as simple as that. It's so healthy. It's incredible how competition has made us a substantially better company. There's a lot of thought and a lot of analysis behind what we're doing. And I think it's going to work great. I think it's going to be an example. And a lot is going to depend on Ari, because whether you like it or not, a lot depends sometimes on a person. We poach a guy from another company, which we never do. I got into a fight with Roby Subirón, who's a founder I like a lot. And we had a kind of a gentleman's agreement. We won't poach from you guys. And we said, this guy, we need him. From the start, we saw this guy as this guy is a different guy. And the reason why I feel confident about what we're doing is because I think we have the right person. And that he's going to be able to decodify all these things about which is the moment and what things are important for this moment. It's like raising kids. I have 2 boys and a girl. The 2 boys are you cannot understand how 2 children from the same parents, born in the same socioeconomic conditions, can be so different. They are so different. So I cannot say the same things to them at the same time. One guy, I don't need to tell him, you need to do this and that, because he's like a machine. He's going to wake up in the morning, go to study. I need to tell him, hey, relax. You should go out with your friends. You should do some exercise. And the other guy is, hey, you need to add some structure. With kids, it's love and limits. But it's important to give them love at the right time and limits. If when the guy needs love, you give him punishments, maybe it's, and you need to understand those things. And with a company, it's the same, I think.
You started the interview, with a discussion of eBay and whether they were the right partner going forward. Yeah. And one of the things that we are beginning to use a word.
The culture of Amazon versus the culture of eBay, it's incredible. I mean, eBay had everything to win. eBay made fun of Amazon. When we partnered with eBay in 2001, eBay's media category, which was books, music, and DVDs, books, CDs, and DVDs, was bigger than all of Amazon. Exactly. Just its media category. Exactly. They made fun of Amazon. By 2006, when our best practice deals had expired, it was like they were in panic mode, and it was already too late. We always say how much we learned of eBay. The first 3 years, it was everything, because what happened a lot is they had all these discussions about all these ideas, and it's a great idea. And then we were back, and a year later, we had implemented, 3 out of the 10 ideas, and they hadn't implemented one. It's not that they didn't know what they had to do. They couldn't do it, or they wouldn't do it. And we were taking their ideas, and then next year, hey, you guys did this. You guys are amazing. No, we just did what you guys told us. We just executed 3 of the 10 ideas that you said. And then the last 2 years, it was, we need to make sure we don't do what eBay is doing. And I remember one thing that happened is at a point in time when Google starts to become prominent, eBay's listings were all sorted using time remaining because they were on auctions. We were also auctions. But it took us like 10 days to pivot away from the time remaining algorithm to a relevance-based algorithm. And we said, the more listings we have, the better. And eBay was, no, everybody has to have, at some point in time, the first listing. And it was like crazy. And they wouldn't change that. It took them years to change the sorting algorithm of the search. It took us 10 days to change that.
Marcos is proud and paranoid. He's built a brilliant foundation for the next generation of leaders, and he has seen the foundations of other once great companies crumble. Companies fail for lack of focus on the core, and companies fail because they optimized the core too much and became irrelevant as markets shifted. Marcos cares about the outer game of strategy. He's obsessed with the world around him, but he cares just as much about the inner game, culture, leadership, turbulence, competitors. And Chris and I have spent decades understanding how great CEOs master both. If profit from the core is the poster child for the outer game, the founder's mentality is the inner game.
Profit from the core came out. We spoke about it around the world. We had great examples, data, tools to mine full potential. It became quite solid. But people were asking questions about, well, I have extra cash and I'm near a lot of growth markets. How do I sort through those that are most likely to succeed? Surely it isn't all just about taking a single business and maintaining its homogeneity, which of course it wasn't. So the second wave of work was also quite analytic. It said, what's the science of moving into adjacent areas? And so we then did another wave of work that we called Unstoppable, which was about the focus, expand, redefine cycle, that there was ultimately a point in most businesses when redefinition very often happened. And there are many iconic examples. IBM was a hardware company that went into services and information that rejuvenated the hardware business. And then that led to more questions about, yes, but isn't there more to the strategy? And so we began looking more closely at those companies that over 15 or even 20 years had sustained growth. And we found something called a repeatable formula. Companies like McDonald's, Tetra Pak, that grew into adjacencies, but in addition to that, had a repeatable model that they used to focus their innovation. It wasn't about robotically doing the same thing mindlessly in a changing world. No, it was about knowing that there are certain things you're very good at. Then the questions became a little different, like the question in the internet period about Enron. This was a huge darling company. Then it was a huge collapse. How could this happen? And so much of it turned out to be the human factor of leadership, hubris, dishonesty, failing to see the world as it was, surrounding yourself with yes men, broadcasting messages instead of truth, etc. And that's what led to the question, isn't there a deeper root cause here? And so the founder's mentality, the best analogy, the best-selling sports book for the last 30 or 40 years has been the inner game of golf and then the inner game of tennis. because so many tennis players have similar fitness. Their strokes are not that different. They play on the identical court with identical balls and rackets. And what really differentiates the ability of somebody like Djokovic to eke out matches against people over and over and over again. And that comes down so much to the inner game, to staying calm, to staying focused, to not giving up, to human elements. And so we began to look for deeper root causes and began asking executives about whether they thought situations where they fell short as a company, significantly short, were external. They said that in maybe 70 or 80% of the time or more, it probably came down to internal decisions, hiring the wrong people, fighting the future like Nokia did, bureaucracy that slowed them down. These were probably the deep root causes. We zeroed in on what we called the founder's mentality, which were the internal elements of health. How do you know if a business is healthy on the inside to achieve growth? Very hard to know. How do you know if it's healthy on the outside? A million measures.
And how do you, if you're asked, the classic elevator pitch, what do you say the magic dust of founder's mentality is? How do you talk about it?
I say that 80 to 82% in our research of root causes of strategy, shortfalls, breakdowns, free fall situations, disasters, traced to internal factors that could have been identified and controllable. And that when we drove deeper into that, we found three elements of health that tended to reduce the chance of those pitfalls engulfing you. Those three were exactly the main attributes that people use to describe the great founders who created the great businesses. Number one, a clear insurgent mission of what you're trying to achieve that is different or even revolutionary to the industry, even waging war on the norms of the industry. Think of SpaceX, 1/10 the cost to get rockets into space. Number two was a frontline obsession. The founders had an intellectual curiosity and a love of the detail, a love of the business that propelled them to constantly ask, why is this happening? How do the customers really feel? Why is that? And then the third element was the epicenter of the success of private equity, which is an owner's mindset, which relates to looking for responsibility or accepting responsibility, not looking to point blame. And that therefore, the great founders had a sense of urgency. They reacted quickly. They acted as if all the money was their own. So that's a lot longer than an elevator pitch. But the elevator pitch would say...
We were on a very high floor.
Something shorter.
Yeah. Is the answer now inner game? As you tell your journey, is the beginning of the journey, it was all outer game, and now the answer is inner game?
No, I don't think we've repealed the laws of microeconomics. I mean, if in fact, ironically, if anything, the 7 companies that have propelled 98% of the value creation in the U.S. stock market for the last 8 years are all leaders, if not monopolists, near monopolists or duopolies in their field, right? So leadership economics, a well-defined core market, optimizing your core is still very important. But I think what we realize is that to do that and to go after the right internal opportunities, say no, which is very often the most important question to answer. And so the internal wiring of those businesses to keep them transparent, looking for what is really going on, not self-delusional, trying to avoid the very easy and dangerous trap of hubris, which ultimately engulfs so many. Those are at the core of all the companies that are still proceeding, along with these rules on the outside. So it really is a higher synthesis of the two, just as it is in anything. The great musicians have magical ability to execute detailed things like Eric Clapton, and yet an amazing intuition for what will work to write, songs like Layla.
So The outer game is what Chris just called the laws of microeconomics. To grow sustainably, of course, you have to have a well-defined core business, drive it to full potential, achieve leadership economics. But the inner game matters too, because your growth will create complexity and that complexity will kill your growth. To fight it, you need to maintain, or in most companies, rediscover your founder's mentality. And this will demand two things. First, with your people, rediscover the why. Why the hell do you exist? Then reorient your company to the frontline and customers, away from head office and managers. Create an owner mindset, which involves a hatred of bureaucracy and a bias to action. Second, you gotta bring back a vertical orientation. Focus on real customers and win. Then take a winning solution and scale it, and then figure out how to amplify what you've discovered across the business through horizontal moves. Outer game, focus on the core. Balance, deliver, and develop. Inner game, it starts with just get your mojo back. Start winning again. And then celebrate the heroes who make those victories happen. And it's interesting, as Chris notes, in the last decade, almost all the value in the stock market has been done by the big tech players. All founder-led, all playing the outer and inner game with new rules.
One of the things that's coming up more and more in our work is this notion of resilience. And I thought the best line you talked about was, when I go out to external markets, I'm a hero. And everybody looks at the journey I've been on and the mountain I'm on. When I talk to a user, I'm as good as the last transaction. But that energy, Marcos,
that physically happened to me.
Well, then you said that.
And I said, you know what? I need to physically move. We had an office that I shared with my two kind of co-founders, Hernan Casa and Nico Sekasi. We had the three of us sat together in a place like this. I said, guys, yes, as of next week, I'm going to sit in the middle of the engineers with Danny Rainer. And I did that for 3 years. I wanted to physically change everything because I said, it's been one era of building the company. Now we need to build the product. The people that, the business people love us and our users are here. I want the opposite to happen. I want our users to have us here and the external world to be here. And this is unsustainable. This is sustainable,
And so that, Marcos, takes so much energy, right? To face the gaps in your business, to constantly say, I'm going to listen to the user that hates me, not the external market that loves me. You answered, I think, for yourself. You said, I get passion in everything, from big things to small things. You talked about your family. Did you specifically within Mercado Libre talk to your people about how they keep energy levels, how they stay resilient? Because what we've seen is tired people do incredible damage to companies. It takes energy.
We talk in Mercado Libre about leading through example. That, for me, is the most important thing. When this guy told me, the board directors told me, hey, why are you doing what you're doing? This is your company. You can do what you love. You can go and play golf. I said, no, I don't want to go and play golf because I don't want the CEO of the Mercado Libre. Now I'm going to be chairman. And now Ariel and everybody else knows that I was willing to leave the thing that I love the most because I want to be 24/7, 365. Now everybody better work 24/7, 365. I'm giving the example. I'm giving up my salary. I'm giving up my job. I'm giving up the position because whoever leads this company cannot be focused on Mercado Libre and other things. Mercado Libre has to be your life.
You say that, but you also talked about the incredible importance of your family. I know you love rugby with a huge passion.
I'm not saying it has to be the only thing you do.
Good, okay.
But I can be with my family, and I am with my family. I'm thinking of Mercado Libre 24/7.
Your wife.
No, my wife knows it. My wife knows it. My wife thinks about Mercado Libre 24/7 as well. I mean, it's our fourth kid. It's a life project. It's a life project for me, for my children, and for my wife. We're all trying to understand how is this going to work out in the next few years.
But where did you replenish your energy?
I think what happened to me, it's also with Jeff Bezos, it's also with Mark Zuckerberg, it's also clearly with Elon Musk, all these founders. Money is irrelevant. It's never, ever, ever about the money. So it's always about the objective, about the project. And the project is so fascinating. and it's growing and it's changing, that right now it's as fascinating as it has ever been. I get the energy from there, but it's also certain kind of people that you need to try and attract. And clearly Ari is like that, and Danny is like that. Well, that's what I try to detect when I'm interviewing. Is this guy a manager? And sometimes we know this guy's a manager, and that's fine. He's going to be, I don't know, the controller. It's great. So you don't need also founder mentality in every role, in every position across a company, because it's a problem. Because founders want to grow, create, ambitious. And if everybody wants to be like that, you don't have enough positions to satisfy all those.
And no one's going to keep the books.
Yeah, and you don't have enough positions to satisfy all those egos. But that's another thing. The process of me leaving creates opportunities, which you need, because when you have all these ambitious people, if you don't create opportunities, you end up losing them. We saw that when Pedro left. We gave 4 internal promotions. It was fantastic. We have an incredible bench. But if those people are in the bench forever, one day they're going to play in another team. So, I mean, in Mercado Libre, it's very clear that the guys from the marketplace, the guys from the fintech, and the engineers are the ones who deliver the value. Everybody else is a supporting role, and that is very clear. I mean, in my team meetings, those are the guys who start let's talk about Mercado Libre. Then Ari would take us through Mercado Libre, and Osvaldo would take us through Mercado Pago, and then Danny's going to talk about technology, and then the CFO talks about what's going on, and the Juan Martín de la Serna, who's kind of a COO, he talks about legal and HR, but first we talk about the Mercado Libre business, and then the technology, and then it's the rest. And everybody knows that, and it's like that, and we don't hide.
We say most big bureaucracies, it's the tyranny of the functional excellence programs. As all the functions just give PowerPoint enema presentations all day.
These guys are there to support the business. That is very, very clear. Yeah. But again, competition is so helpful. It's so helpful in aligning everybody. I think Amazon, these guys are really good. But they have a discipline, They're not willing to lose $500 million per year forever in Brazil. I don't know how many they've been losing, but they've been losing substantial money in Brazil. But there's a point where they say, hey, maybe this money is better spent in Germany, where we make money, or in the UK. At some point in time, there's some discipline. So far, with the Chinese, we've seen no willingness to restrain anything. And their technology is really good, and they work a lot. And so we say it's going to be a long and tough battle.
Look, Marcos doesn't beat around the bush. His job is 24/7. It demanded relentless energy. And he warns us, if I didn't have that energy, my job was to step aside because there are 4 other leaders that would take my place because they want to write their own chapters. We may all wonder, could we do a 24/7 job? Would we even want to? If you can't or won't devote that much time to your job, it's important to remember. We all deserve work that energizes us, work that excites us so much that, it steals a bit of our discretionary energy. Work we think about in the shower or while walking in the park, because we all deserve to be on noble missions. All right, so how the hell are we going to recap this episode? First, it's the outer game. Power of the core, leadership economics. Chris showed us that sustainable growth does not come from chasing hot markets or diversifying for the sake of it. It comes from doubling down on what we do best, building repeatable models, and, it comes from dominating. But of course, this is the era of turbulence, so we have to optimize the core while also adapting it to stay relevant. Second, the inner game, the founder's mentality. Nurture it, rediscover it, and then shift your orientation more vertically. Focus on customers in the front line. Win, then scale, then amplify. Third, of course, it's a balance between the inner and outer game. The CEO's job is never just one thing. It's economics and competition, but it's also leadership and culture. The best leaders help their teams win against external competitors and help them overcome those internal energy vampires. It's the outer game against competition. It's the inner game against complexity. And the best CEOs know how to win with both, without losing energy, without losing focus, without losing their people. So that's the final CEO interview for this season. But guess what? We're not done with you yet. In 2 weeks, we're going to come back with the wrap-up episode, and we're going to try to pull this all together. So thanks for sticking with us. Stay curious.